The battle of wizards and warriors continues with iron swords. The evil wizard Malkill will take the shape of the earth, wind, water, and fire. Farewell! The fate of the world is in your hands!
You're listening to the Piercing Wizard podcast, and I'm your host, Brian Moeller. I'm a professional body piercer with 20 years experience. I travel around the world teaching technique and safety classes, and I'm a member of the Association of Professional Piercers. Listen in as I talk to my friends and colleagues about our industry so we can all stay sharp. Hi everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to another episode. This week I've got my good buddy Brian Moeller from the Boston Tattoo Company in Somerville, Massachusetts. We're going to be talking about a couple different things. First off, we're going to be talking about how to market your studio for that kind of like professional clientele that you want. You know, depending on how your shop is laid out, the kind of presentation and colors and just like the feel, the vibe that you give off from your shop can really dictate what kinds of clients come through your door. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. When I first met Brian, he was kind of like freshly from the Atlantic City area, you know, and he was, you know, very much like a boardwalk kind of like tourist trap piercer, you know, not to say that in like a negative way, but, you know, I've seen him change a lot over the past, 10 or so years that I've known him. You know, first he was posting a lot of pictures of like corsets and this and that, you know, the things that would like get people's attention, but, you know, not necessarily like the most like respectable kind of work, you know, something to build like long-term clientele. And kind of a funny story is, you know, I feel like we kind of hit it off like right away, you know, like we became friends pretty quickly. And at the time, me and all of my buddies at work up here were all playing Call of Duty back on like PS3. And, Brian was like, oh, hey, I like Call of Duty. I was like, cool, let's all, shoot fake people in a video game together. And then we were like hanging out in public, and I was like, oh, man, Brian's making us look bad. And he just got this like cold sweat on his face. And it's because he thought that I was like talking about his body piercing, like, you're making us look bad as body piercers because you're terrible, Brian. And I totally didn't mean it that way. I meant it because he was like really good at Call of Duty, and he was like shooting people in the face and making all of me and like my other teammates look bad because like we're idiots with video games. So, fast forward 10 years, and, Brian is a member of the APP. He's really involved in conference. He does a lot of work with AV and conference committee and all this stuff. And it's really great to see Brian kind of like, achieve all these different things. So it's just kind of cool, seeing my friends, have success like that. So first off, we're going to kind of talk about our shops and our theories and our opinions on like how you get the right clients through your door. Then we'll take a little bit of a break, and then we're going to talk about surface anchors and a couple other things. So stick around, and let's talk to Brian Moeller from the Boston Tattoo Company. Oh, well, it only took us 40 minutes.
40 minutes, one button click.
To figure out how to record a podcast over Skype. All right, so I am on Skype with Brian Moeller. It's a bit of an experiment trying to figure out this new recording program. Most of my interviews are done face-to-face, but Brian has a horrible face, so I wanted to keep as much distance as possible.
That is fair. Completely fair.
Go ahead and introduce yourself, Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian Moeller. I'm the manager and head piercer at the Boston Tattoo Company in the greater Boston area.
Now, do you only pierce heads, or do you pierce the body also?
I'm more of a neck-up kind of person, trying to make other people look better, considering my face is hideous.
Right. Well, okay. So, a subject that you brought up, you wanted to talk about how studios kind of market themselves and how you can have maybe different clientele based on how you present your shop. Was that the idea that you were kind of talking about?
Yeah. Oftentimes, piercing's been going on for quite some time. I'd say a good 30 to 40 years easily as far as an industry. And we are at a point that we know what works and we know what doesn't work as far as placement and long-term healing. And oftentimes, like, I think piercing projects were more popular in like the mid 2000s, or back in the BME days, there was a lot of experimental stuff, like scar and brace and all those other things. And at this point, I feel like in the industry in this year, then that we know what's going to work. And sometimes people try to market themselves by trying to reinvent the wheel, and that's when you see things like corsets or piercing projects, plate piercings, or just like bad piercing trends like horizontal tongue piercing, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I feel
I've definitely noticed, like, when I started piercing, and I kind of have the sneaking suspicion, like, when you started piercing too, it was more like do some shock value kind of stuff, like with piercing to get yourself noticed. For me, it was like, I remember doing a couple of corsets, but it was more like, surface piercings and stuff like that, and hadn't really like fully grasp like the theory and the technique behind surface piercings at the time. So some of them would heal, some of them would just leave some pretty nasty scars. And then like as I've advanced through my career, it's less about like, oh, this like in your face extreme thing that like makes people like kind of turn their heads and notice. Now it's like this like small, delicate, refined, fancy jewelry kind of thing rather than like crazy piercing locations. Do you feel like you kind of had that like trend also?
Oh, absolutely. I would say before I became an NAPP member, you and I were still, we were really good friends, and I remember doing corsets, and you would just kind of like tilt your head, and it's like, but at the time it was what is the word? It was attention, basically. It grabbed people's attention, but I felt for the wrong reasons. But at the time, it's what worked for me, and my studio was not at a point where we could have invested in nicer jewelry. Mm-hmm. Now things have changed, where what we try to tell people and explain is like, everyone's seen a nose piercing, everyone knows what they look like, everyone knows where they're done or how they're done. But have you seen it with this more unique particular style of jewelry that has way more value, I feel, in my opinion, as far as a unique piercing, and also is more applicable as a business. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, as I said before, and kind of like try to think outside the box for something that's either like a corset, for example. Yeah, it looks cool. The actual application, it's simple and it's not long term, and it's a big waste of resources and money, I feel, at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like you actually get clientele from something like a corset, because I did notice that you did a bunch of them earlier on in your career, and it was like,
terribly guilty of that.
Yeah, but I mean, I did too. Like I did a couple that I like submitted to Tattoo Savage magazine in like 1998, stuff like that. Like that's what got you attention then. But I really don't feel like it ever got me clients. I think it was like people were like, oh, did you see that crazy lace someone's neck or someone's back or something like that? But it didn't really transition to somebody coming into my store and saying like, oh, hey, I want, A, B, or C body piercing, because like people weren't looking at a corset and being like, oh man, I want a corset and I want to go pay for a corset. It was just like, whoa, did you see that weird thing? And I think it actually kind of held me back and kind of held like the overall industry back for a while, because it was so much about like, just pay attention to this, just notice body piercing, stuff like this. And it got people thinking about it, but it didn't really transition into like building a client base. And now, like when I put work online, I do it exclusively as kind of like advertisement, as in, hey, I know I'm posting this ear piercing that you've seen a bunch of places, or this nose piercing, or this navel piercing that you've seen a bunch of places, but it's because lots of people want it, and I want them to come to me to have it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, actually, when I used to do corsets and stuff like that, even still, the few people that did come in and see that and were like, oh, I want that. Even still, there was that explaining of like, well, this is just for looks. It's just really, it's a fancy photo shoot, no sense. And yeah, you just kind of felt stupid, because it's like, yeah, this is what got me attention. And then here you are justifying it like, well, I just did it so you would look at me, which was not in those words exactly, but that was pretty much the explanation after that. But yeah, I think right now I have more, I'm more proud of what we can do in the shop, as far as like people coming in all the time, like they'll see like new stuff we posted and they're like, I want that. Or, I'm sure you've had the same thing. You have clients coming in looking at you or your staff and seeing the jewelry you're wearing and be like, wow, that looks amazing. That's what I want. And that kind of, I think, garners better. And like I said, is more applicable as far as a business.
Yeah, I feel like it's maybe maturity isn't the right word for it, but when I was a 20-year-old piercer or a 21-year-old piercer or whatever with my first studio, it's like, yeah, sure, cool. Like, I'm like a BME kid, and I have like 50 piercings, and I have way too much stuff, and it's like tacky jewelry and all that stuff. So maybe I didn't have like the eye for marketing and for presentation yet, and I can definitely see this progression of going from that studio and, even like the layout and the look of the studio and how I presented it. It was a lot of like, hey, just pay attention to this kind of thing, rather than like really look at it and really like see what can be done with you. And then when I moved to my second studio, changed the way that the shop looked and felt, and then onto the studio that I have now. And now it's like very deliberate the way I try to present everything, and it's really just like the way I want people to like look at my business. I don't want them to look at my business and be like, oh, it's extreme, it's fringe, it's something like that. I want them to look at it and just be like, oh, it's like a salon, it's like some professional service. It's like when people go to get their hair done or their nails done or tanning or something like that, where they just feel like it kind of shows who they are and they want to just like look nice and fancy. That's how I want them to see my body piercing. I don't want them to see it as like a freak show kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I feel like most successful shops today have all experienced a similar evolution, if you will. I'd say the internet definitely helped with a lot of that. Before back in the 80s and 90s, a lot of people just heard about other people doing similar things, versus nowadays the internet has shown the world everything. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse. I mean, there's plenty of people that bring in bad pictures of bad piercings and like, I want this. And like, we can do better. But yeah, I feel like it's kind of opened that window up to not just those who are in the industry or fascinated with that, but to the general public. And yeah, as you said, made it more into a fashion thing, more like a jewelry gallery versus, fast, cheap, easy, sit down, here you go. And this is where all the weird shit happens.
Yeah, there are definitely still clients that come in and, they have a picture on their phone of like a piercing that maybe I don't offer for personal reasons or for safety reasons, and they still say like, I want this. And it's like, well, I appreciate that, but that's not really what I do. Like I'm fine kind of like letting certain services fade off, certain jewelry styles, certain piercing locations kind of like fade into memory, because I want to stay fresh and I want to stay relevant. One big thing that really made a difference for me is kind of separating my body piercing services from the tattooing services in my shop. I mean, it's obviously still done in the same shop, but at my last studio, when everything was all in kind of like one big space, like the lobby was made for tattooing and piercing, and the displays and the website and the portfolios and all that stuff, like it all had like a very like crossover between tattoo and piercing feeling to it. And now I'm kind of separating it where it's like, okay, we have our body piercing floor and then we have our tattooing floor. They have their own feel, they have their own theme, they have their own music, they have their own colors, because I really want to separate it. I almost call it like the sticker era, or like my sticker progression. Like I used to have stickers on everything in my last studio, and it would be like piercing stickers, jewelry stickers, tattoo stickers, and just like everything, every surface of every cabinet and drawer was like stickers. And now like in my new studio, like that's the one thing that I was like, this is what I can't have anymore. Like I don't want it to just look like I'm some teenager like in his bedroom with like his favorite band posters on the wall. Like I wanted it to look like a business and look like something that like a mom would bring her kids in for, rather than just kind of like, I don't know, like the whole tattoo parlor feel is really something that I tried to move away from.
Yeah, I can agree, especially with in Massachusetts, since tattooing was illegal for quite some time up until 2000, 2001. A lot of people still, despite how far things have come into the shop, like if you come into either Boston Tattoo Company locations, it's just the aesthetics alone just kind of show like this isn't your run-of-the-mill tattoo parlor, as you said, but tattoo parlors still have that imagery of being ran by bikers and sailors and prostitutes, and having an undesirable crowd, and having someone come into the studio and just like look around and be refreshed, like, oh wow, this isn't what I was expecting. I mean, yeah, there's still a big scary tattooed pierced person behind the counter until you start talking to them and you realize, oh yeah, no, actually they're extremely professional and just as nerdy and introverted as I can be sometimes.
Yeah, I was talking to Jeff on a podcast earlier, and he went from Rockstar in Providence to Gamma in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and they have a competing shop in the same town, and they're the shop that's kind of like the higher energy, the brighter colors, more kind of like geared towards like youth and self-expression, things like that. And Jeff's studio, he wasn't really trying to compete against that, but he was just trying to kind of give a different environment for like the soccer moms that want to come in, they want to bring in their teenage daughter for something, and they might feel uncomfortable in like a high energy kind of studio. So I prefer Jeff's kind of look at it, because I had those like, bold, bright colors, loud metal music playing on the stereo. I had those shops for a long time, and I saw like how slow my growth was for body piercing, because I was alienating a lot of the clients that maybe wanted my services but didn't necessarily feel as comfortable and as welcome in that kind of environment. So now, I've got softer music, softer colors. The counter staff is trained to greet and talk to people in a certain way, and just the way that everything is laid out and set up, it's just made to be a lot more inviting. And I feel like you almost do a disservice if you're running a shop where it's like extreme and it's it's very bold and things like that, because you might be keeping away some of your clientele that might not feel comfortable with that kind of environment.
Yeah, I completely agree. With my the way we did our advertising, I mean, anyone who's seen any of the stickers that I've ever made, you, from looking at it, you would have no idea that it was about piercing at all, and for me, as far as our advertising and the way we do our business cards, stickers, any kind of like clothing, it's never, the usual, like, of course it hurts, or, pierce for your pleasure, it's getting away from that, and just setting, just kind of like setting a vibe, if you will, as you said, having an environment that is curious but not in your face scary, and not intense, basically.
Yeah, I mean, like, you don't want it to be boring. I mean, I'm definitely not saying you want it to be boring, but you don't want it to be intimidating either. I think one of the mistakes that some people make in this industry is that they create the environment for the staff, not for the client. And that's something that I would really try to urge people to, step back and look at it. Think of the people that want to walk through your door and want to spend money. Make it comfortable for them. Obviously you're going to be spending a lot of time there. You're going to be working there, so you want it to be comfortable for you and the staff also. But you don't want it to be all about that. It can't just be music for the staff. It can't just be, art and things like that. If you have a bunch of posters with ladies with their boobs out kind of thing, like, maybe that'll appeal to a certain kind of clientele, but it's not going to be mass appeal. You want it to be comfortable for all the different people that want your services.
Yeah, you're not going to please everybody, but you definitely want to please as many as possible, or at least not discriminate against anything for whatever reason, whether it be style, taste, or personal.
Yeah, and I know that you probably might lose some of the clients that still look at body piercing as like extreme and things like that, but in my experience, those are the clients that you don't really keep long term anyway. They maybe want to get this, they maybe want to get that. If you're offering the highest quality service for what they want, they'll still come to you, but maybe if you kind of remove some of that like shock factor, kind of like pizzazz appeal, you might lose some clients in the long term. But I don't think that those are the clients that are really coming into body piercing studios anymore. So, well,
you do it. You definitely have some people that will come in wanting the extreme stuff. But there's actually a gentleman I met who works for a TripAdvisor company, and the one thing he mentioned was like, anyone can be a customer that walks into the door, but not everyone can be a client.
Yeah.
And that being open to both of those, and just understanding that, if someone might come in for one thing and you might never see them again, the total, definitely a customer of the shop. But the clients is where, that repeat business is definitely where the focus is for myself. I'm definitely, I love this pierce and sell to everybody, but not, sometimes people come in with unrealistic expectations, but having a general overall comfortable shop and setup is generally where you're going to benefit the most from.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed, maybe more so in the last couple of years, that I have an interaction with the client and I can just tell, like, okay, you're either not going to come back or you're not going to leave a good review, and it's not because I did anything negative or bad. It's just that we didn't click, or you didn't click with the shop or something like that. Like you came in with this one expectation, and maybe the studio has kind of like moved past that. When people come in and they show the pictures of like a horizontal tongue is like a perfect explanation, a perfect example of that. They'll be like, bam, my friend has this and it healed, and it's like, well, I don't do that for this reason, and then they're just like, oh, well, fine, and then they're just gonna go somewhere else, and they're gonna think that I'm the dope because, like, I can't do this piercing that totally worked on their friend, which I'm still not convinced that anybody actually heals those things long term, but you kind of get the idea. Like, certain times, like, no matter what you present your shop as, how you have it set up, you're not going to be able to make 100% of people happy. So I would just like to go for the biggest majority of people possible for a client base.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with as you said, with people coming in, I've had people come in like, oh, you have great reviews on Yelp, and then immediately I'm not a fan of review websites. Granted, the review sites, for our shop, for the piercing aspect, are pretty awesome as a majority. I think there's only like maybe one or two bad 1-star reviews, but my best example is like someone graduated high school, he comes right into our shop and he's like, oh, I want to get this in my throat. Kid has no other tattoos, and immediately like, hey, listen, it's your first one. That's kind of a job killer. You just, you're young. Maybe think about maybe different placement, that maybe, this isn't the best thing to dive into. He goes home, writes a Yelp review saying, oh, they treated me like a kid, said my idea was stupid. Yeah. Well, yes, essentially we did, but not for that reason. And you can't really gain context from those things. And like I said, that was a lose-lose. There's no way you're going to convince that person, they came in dead set like, this is what I'm doing. And sometimes you got to pull the morality card, and sometimes there are repercussions from that. Yeah. The online review thing, like, it hasn't really bitten me too hard yet because, like, I've been pretty fortunate to have decent reviews, but I have had a couple of interactions. Like, I had one just like a week or two ago where a woman came in, she had some used jewelry just in her hand, and she took it outside of the studio, and I was just doing my normal polite thing, like, oh, I would ask you in the future, just bring it in a plastic baggie. Here's one right now. I'll just ask you to clean your hands. I asked her to wash her hands because she was handling her jewelry, and I said it in the calmest, most professional voice I could, and she just got really, really upset at me, and she was just like, it's my jewelry, and I was like, I understand that, but there are other people in here, there are staff, there are employees, and it's not their jewelry, and it could put them at a potential risk, blah, blah, blah. And all I could see was just like her mentally writing a 1-star review in her head, and I was just like, oh, she was typing it in her head. Pretty much, yeah, and it's just like, oh, well, I'm sorry that, I'm just trying to be hygienic, but yeah, I could just tell that, like, she hated me, like, immediately, just because of, me just going through the motions of my job. So yeah, I had a double-edged sword. We've had similar issues. Like, nostril jewelry is the most common, that people are looking for something or they have it in their hand, and yeah, I'll come out with put gloves on and put it in a baggie, and at first people are kind of like put off. They're just like, I'm not a gross person, and it's just like, listen, everyone has their own cooties. This has been in your nose longer than most boogers have. That's all. Try to keep it a little bit playful. But yeah, sometimes with certain people, like I said, they come in with unrealistic expectations, and it's a losing battle, but it's just a matter of how gracefully you can lose at it. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. All right, so let's wrap up this topic, and then you wanted to talk a little bit about surface anchors too, right? Yes. All right, so let's wrap this one up, and then we'll come back to that. Cool. All right, so let's keep it rolling along. Next, we're going to talk about surface anchors. Some people might call them microdermals or dermals, but surface anchors is basically how we're going to refer to them.
Some piercers are not even really offering them anymore. They've been out there in the wild for maybe 10 years or so, and you see some really mixed results for long-term healing success or even short-term healing success. So some piercers are just deciding that it's not even worth it offering something that you can't give people a reasonable assumption that this can heal good if you take good care of it. 10 years from now you can still have it and it can still look great. But surface anchors don't really fall into that category, unfortunately. So some piercers, Brian included, are actually dropping them as a professional service and not offering them anymore. I feel like I might be kind of heading in that direction. I've really pulled back on the locations that I'll offer them on. At this point, it's maybe 3 or 4 different body locations, and that's really all I'm doing. So we'll talk a little bit about why we're saying no more than yes lately, and how we say no, because you don't want to just turn someone away and have them go somewhere else. You want to give them that education of, this is why I'm saying no, just so you understand why it's maybe not a great idea, and hopefully they'll listen to you, but more often than not, they probably won't. So anyway, let's chat a little bit more with Brian and talk about some surface anchors. All right, so a subject that you wanted to talk about was surface anchors and kind of making the decision to stop offering them. Surface anchors, for people who aren't aware of it, some people call them single point piercings, some people call them microdermals, but it's basically just a little piece of jewelry, kind of like a little foot kind of shaped thing. You have like the longer toe end and you have the shorter heel end. You make a little hole, make it basically like a pocket under the surface, you pop the jewelry in, and the school of thought with them was that you could put them all over the place, like they can heal almost anywhere, and you can do all these different things that you couldn't do with surface piercings. And there were years of experimentation where people were putting them all over the place, and now I think that we're seeing the long-term healing of those, or maybe like the lack of long-term healing. Some piercers are kind of either dialing back like the locations that they're willing to place them, or just kind of not offering them altogether. So what are some of your thoughts on that?
I came to Boston in 2008 hoping to yes, I'm going to do all of these. This is before I was into nicer jewelry, and I was like, I'm going to put dermals in everybody. And unfortunately, that street slang still stuck, and everyone calls it that today. Mm-hmm. And for my studio, once we finally got rid of the idea of making things, since we stopped appealing to the shock factor of things and started actually going into the quality of what we offered and different nicer options, we have a limited budget. I don't own my studio, and trying to bring in more jewelry and nicer things and different options is one of those things to do it successfully. It's a little bit at a time. There was a moment where we only offered one color CZ from Neo Metal. That was it. And right now, with the way they've turned out, like we did them for a while, telling people like, hey, listen, just so you can't put this anywhere. There are limitations. If you put it in a flexible spot, it's going to come out way faster. But even if it's done well, 2 to 5 years is the realistic lifetime of this thing. It will either pop out eventually, or you'll have to get it removed. And because of the popularity of it, and because it was something new, like a lot of the mall stores in the area and crappier stores are doing them for extremely cheap, which that doesn't concern me. That's, I'm not competing with them. But I'm at a point now where my jewelry budget, we don't get a lot of demand for it. And we just recently made the decision this summer to stop offering it as a service, because we literally make more money removing them than we do putting them in. Mm-hmm. And if we're really going to take that flagship of doing quality work that's going to heal well and be long term, that kind of goes with that. There's nothing wrong with it. I know plenty of people that have them. I used to have them, but yeah, in the long run for us, I'd rather focus my jewelry budget on something that's going to be a little bit nicer long term, versus like, here you go, see you in a year or two, maybe 5, or eventually this will have to come out.
Yeah. You can always have like accidents with any piercing where maybe it won't work long term or something, but I think surface anchors are one of the piercings that people can kind of agree on that, like, all right, you're probably not going to have this 10 years from now. I've done ones that have lasted that long, but they're definitely the minority. The majority are usually, just like you said, they're gone in a year, maybe 2, because there's such a small amount of tissue under this. A small amount of jewelry under the surface that it doesn't really take much. You snag it on a towel, you catch it on your shirt, it just gets like, your dog jumps up and whacks it or something like that,
Yeah.
and then it's done, So people come in now, and I still offer them, but I've really scaled back the placements that I'll offer. So, I'll do them, on the face, like in like the teardrop area, maybe on the forehead. If people want something like on the face, I'll usually try to steer them towards a surface bar. And then other spots on the body, like I don't do them on collarbones anymore. I don't do them on like cleavage areas anymore. I don't do it in like that Madison, like front of the neck kind of placement. I will do quote unquote hips, but they're really not the hips area. It's more like on the stomach. I go a couple inches above the highest point that their pants touch when they come in, because I don't want something catching on it. The like lower back dimples, I don't really do those much anymore. Maybe if somebody's body shape was like ideal and they had like a little nook for it, but most of the time those are going to fail too. And I don't like offering something that I know is going to fail eventually.
Yeah, I am in the same mindset. I did before. We used to do the same thing. It was like, yeah, let's do it everywhere. And then people were like looking for like wrists. And I was like, I'll do it 3 inches from the bend. We used to do that. Mm-hmm. We totally avoided collarbones, avoided cleavage spots. Back in the neck, we still did. So, the teardrop area as well. But it was just one of those things where even still, it's like, here's this service. You're limited to these 4 spots. And there's not much jewelry options for it because we didn't get a lot of demand. And even if we did have a lot of demand for it, it's almost aggravating. It's for me, like whenever anyone has a problem with a piercing and they're coming back with issues, it's always a little bit of troubling, if you will. But for something like that, it's expected.
Yeah.
You're expecting this to fail, and planning for failure is dumber than regular planning, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, it's good that people are at a point where they can kind of start to pull back on it, because I think, kind of going back to our earlier conversation, in the 90s and in the 2000s, like people would just say yes to like any crazy placement, and it was almost seen as like a challenge, like, I bet I could do that. I bet I could pull that off. And I'm sure that if there had been a big trend of like horizontal tongue piercings back in the BME days, I'm sure I would have tried one. Like now, I'm pretty conservative about my piercing. I don't like to do big, crazy, like gnarly stuff. And that's definitely surface piercings. I mean, surface anchors. So I actually really love doing traditional surface piercings, because I think with the rise of surface anchors, it almost became like a lost art form with some body piercers. They were just kind of going the easy route, popping in a bunch of anchors instead of like the more complicated procedure of like, a really nice freehand technique and a really nice surface bar and, really cautious placement and all these different things. I think surface piercing techniques really like faded away for a good like 5 to 10 year chunk of time. And now they're starting to kind of come back into popularity, and people are really focusing on those techniques to make surface piercings heal, because, they can be a lot more long-term viable than some of these surface anchors.
Yeah, I agree. I feel, if you consider that the earlier versions of that came around, what would you say, like 2004 perhaps? But they really didn't gain in popularity till like the later 2000.
They definitely went through their evolution, where it was like that first version of a surface anchor that almost looked like a nostril screw with like a curlicue thing under the surface. But
I think the old Ben Trigg, I think, did that.
Yeah, they were just, the advancement, but the jewelry that people like look at and identify as like surface anchors now, I think that was like right around 2004, 2005.
Yeah. So even still, they didn't invent the tools to put them in until years later.
Yeah.
But I feel it kind of had the same wave of like the tongue piercing, for example, when that gained popularity in the 90s. It was one of those things everyone realized like that was the new thing. And just kind of got cheapened and watered down over the years. I feel there's now, if you go to any mall store, there's loads and loads of like really bad jewelry for that, and just like crappy, cheap alternatives. And it got to the point where this was something cool and unique, and has been made, I personally feel has been made kind of cheapened over the years, where surface anchors were the same thing. Like it was a unique science in a sense, and it was a unique, differently a unique piercing. And then now, like, you go to the mall and you just see large signs like, we do dermals, we specialize in this, or stuff like that. And I feel like it's at that point now. And that, for us,
it's
that's why we
because
just,
like it takes such a small amount of skill to install them. You know, you can definitely like dial it in, and you can have like the perfect surface anchor technique, and you know, you can be really experienced. But honestly, like, it's way easier to do a surface anchor than it is to do a surface piercing. So like, yeah, of course, piercers that are like maybe like low on skill or experience level, they'll gravitate towards those because, you know, it's like, oh, you know, you want some crazy, you want like an anchor made out of gems on your thigh or something like that. It's like, well, yeah, it's not possible to do that with the surface piercing, and you know, especially if people don't want to spend $2,000 on it, you know, and it's not going to heal anyway. So a surface anchor, they think like, well, you know, I'll pop it in, people will have it for a couple of months, they'll put pictures on Instagram that people will notice and people will remember my name, but then, you know, they don't see those like horribly scarred after pictures when it's just, you know, 50 gnarly chunks of scar tissue.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we see the same thing with tattoo trends today, especially like with Pinterest. People bring in these like completely all white ink pieces or something that's just like way too detailed and way too small. And exactly, and everyone brings these things in thinking it's like, no, the internet says it's true. And it's like, listen, this was taken immediately after it was done. Like, try to look up the picture of it healed, and you won't. You know, no one ever puts that, and if they do put it, usually it's horrendous looking.
Yeah.
I remember even locally here, there was a young lady who had like 30 surface anchors put from her hand and forearm in one sitting. And yeah, it looks a mess at this point now. None of them are in there anymore, pretty much. And it's just like a bunch of big lumpy scars now.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes people have to learn the hard way, but I wish that people would post more consequences type photos. You know, the big thing that I don't like is when, let's say, you or I take out really badly done piercings by someone else. We can take a picture and we can use that for education, or we can take that same picture and just be like, look how much of a hack this person is. I don't like to do that in any way. I would rather kind of just, you know, keep a competitor's name off of the picture.
Agreed.
Not just like dump on where they got it done. But, you know, you can say, well, these are the consequences of what happens when it's bad jewelry or bad placement or bad technique or something, and now you understand why I say no to things like this, rather than just kind of being like, you know, oh, they're not as good as me, this wouldn't happen at my place. Because, you know, I've made mistakes along the way, and, you know, hopefully people that are making mistakes are learning from them. But yeah, I don't know. I wish clients would have an easier time believing it when we say no for a reason, you know, rather than just kind of being like, well, I saw it online, or my friend has it or something. And it's like, well, yeah, totally, I could take your money and I totally could put a gem on your finger, but, you know, I care enough about having long-term clientele being happy than I care about your $50 or your $100 that I could make today. Like, I would rather keep people happy long-term than, you know, make you happy today, but, you know, make you regret something like a month or a year from now.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm doing my best right now to try to avoid sounding like the old man of get off my lawn. I'm old and I fear change, but I feel like today I experience this more now that when I turn down a client, they just take it personal, like extremely personal, and it's one of those things. Sometimes I have to like politely like, you know, wind back, like, you know, hey, listen, I'm. It's not against you. It's not that I don't like you or anything like that. Trust me, I'd love to make money off you. Absolutely would. But this is more of a moral, you know, morality thing. This isn't because, you know, I don't like the way your face looks or anything like that. But people really do take things very, very personal for some reason.
Well, you know, I think it's the internet age. It's like, you know, you have instant gratification with almost everything, you know, and people want that instant gratification with a body piercing, and sometimes they don't want to think about, you know, consequences or like long-term results, and it gets kind of murky when you take something like a surface piercing. I mean, a surface anchor. I keep getting those mixed up. But if somebody comes in and they say, you know, I want one on, like a really good example. Someone came in the other day and they wanted one on their chest, you know, and it was a woman. And basically I told her, like, all right, do this really scientific test for me. Look in the mirror. I'm going to put this dot on you right where you say that you want it, okay? Now take your arms and cross them in front of you. And then her cleavage line went up like an extra 6 inches up her chest, and like the dot was completely gone. And I was like, do you understand now why I don't want to do this surface anchor in this spot? She was like, oh yeah, I never would have even thought of that. And it's like, well, I didn't think of it for a while either, and I've done plenty of surface anchors in that kind of cleavage placement. But I was seeing like really similar healing results. They would get kind of shifted or tilted this way or that way from like movement, from cleavage, things like that. And so now I don't offer that at all. And I tell people, like, this probably could heal on you. Maybe 50% of the ones that I did before healed like reasonably long term. They looked fine, but the other 50% just healed so poorly that I just don't want to even take that gamble. Because like if you look at something like a nostril or a navel, when you have a problem, it's a rarity. You can pretty confidently say, like, 99% success rate on something like a nostril or a navel or something. And if people who wanted a nostril piercing only had a 50% chance of being able to heal it, I don't think they would want to get it, especially if it was like, well, it's going to leave like a big nasty scar. I think that's the kind of mentality that clients just don't have, because they don't see those consequences after. They don't see what the scars look like, things like that. And I always just try to tell them, like, it'll be a gem now, but a year from now it's going to be a scar. Like, do you really want that in this placement? And that's why I really don't like to offer them, much anymore. I still do some of them, but I'm very picky about where.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with collarbones. That was a very, very highly requested placement, and immediately I would just have them like, hey, yeah, pinch that collarbone area and then turn your head left and right, up and down, and it's like, you feel that tugging, and you're like, well, yeah. I'm like, well, if you have a piercing in there, I mean, it's not really going to heal if it's constantly being pulled in different directions, even mildly. I tell them, like, if this is, normal placement, 2 to 5 years, something flexible like that, maybe a year to 2, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And that's not counting small animal, like small dogs and little kids. Those are number one things that usually people snag those things on.
Or a loofah.
Or a loofah, yeah. And it's one of those things where people are like, it's okay, I'll take the risk, I think I'll be careful with it. And it's like, well, yeah, no one plans for an accident.
Yeah.
These are things that are just, I see this every day.
I feel like the clients who get some of the more questionable stuff, surface anchors and, the tattoos on the side of the finger, like, I feel like those are very similar clients, and they're getting it because they want it to look really cute. Like they want to be cute, they want to feel cute, they want to have cute things. And I really wish that they would just kind of stop and think and be like, well, do you think it's going to be cute when you just have a scar there? Do you think it's going to be cute when you just have like a blob of ink on the side of your finger and you can't read what it's, it's supposed to be some cute cursive thing, but it just looks like a mess. It's the same kind of analogy. It's like, if you went into a hairdresser and you were like, I want this dye job or this cut or this whatever, and they're like, okay, sure, I will do that, and it'll look really cute for a week, but then a week from now, you're going to look like a total mess. It's going to be this like frizzy, crazy, stringy thing, and it's going to look terrible, and you're not going to be able to do anything about it, unless you want to spend a ton of money for something corrective. Then, people would be like, oh, of course I wouldn't want to do that. But when it comes to body art, people are so impulsive that they're just like, I don't care, I want it now. And it's like, I don't care if I'm going to look terrible for the next 10 years because of it. I want it to look cute today. And it's like, I made those mistakes. I have a bunch of old piercing scars that I regret and tattoos that I regret. And it's like, I just don't want you to have to regret it. And I don't want to have to be the face that you attach to that regret.
Yeah, or even still, like, be that person out there, and it's just like, what is that blob on the side of the finger, or where'd you get that done at? And they're going to be like, oh, I got this done at so-and-so shop. Yeah. And even, they're not going to take the moment to explain the science of why that placement didn't work well because of the way the skin cells are and everything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's weird, though, with body art. People have sometimes, like, very rarely, I'll get people have like this Captain Ahab mentality of like, I'm getting this white whale and that's it. A different example from service anchors, I had this older woman who was like probably in her early 40s, had a tummy tuck, and wanted her navel pierced. And it was one of those things, like, the surgeon was like, oh yeah, you could totally get this done once this is finished. And she got her navel pierced elsewhere, rejected because of the piercing through the scar, and it was not nearly even remotely been settled. And she came and wanted me to do it again. And I was like, hey, listen, this isn't going to work. You literally have experienced this before, and you saw it push out. And she's like, well, yeah, but I want it pierced because I think the scar's ugly. I'm like, well, that's fine, but two negatives don't make a positive. This is going to do the same thing that you just had happen. And she was very much like, that's okay. I'm like, no, why is this okay? This shouldn't be okay. I don't want to do this for you, and know that it's not going to work out. It's not even like there's a 50-50 at this point. Mm-hmm. And she literally begged me at the counter. It's like, please, will you please do it? I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, this isn't personal. This is strictly, my own self. I know this isn't going to work. And I'm telling you it's not going to work. Why she still wanted to do it was beyond me.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, sometimes it's like this mental connection where people feel like it's the missing piece to their puzzle. And, like, I can totally respect that and get that. And I've had similar situations with people who come in with tummy tucks, which is one of my favorite, like, medical words. It's abdominoplasty. I just like saying that. But
that's a fun word.
Yeah. But, it's the same thing. It goes back to, you put time and you put money into something because you were self-conscious about it, or, you wanted the aesthetic look of having a flatter tummy. Do you really want to, like, wreck it by having, like, a big gnarly scar there? Like, I know that you have that relocation scar around the navel, but, having a really nasty rejection scar, 3 months from now, 6 months, 12 months from now, it's not going to make you happier, and, like, I understand that you'll be happy looking in the mirror and seeing that jewelry there, but you're really not going to be happy with it long term, and whenever I tell people no, I always try to also add in, if you go to another shop, like, because a lot of times when you say no, they're just going to go somewhere else until they find somebody that says yes. Unless they're one of those clients where they're like, oh, okay, your points make sense. I changed my mind. I don't want this anymore. Most of the time they go somewhere else. And I always just tell them, like, look, when you go somewhere else, if they don't try to talk you out of it, like, realize that it's not because I'm lying to you. It's because they maybe just don't care if you end up with that scar. Maybe they just value your money over your long-term happiness. And really, really think about it. Like, I'm not saying no because I want to ruin your day. I'm saying no because I respect you as a client. And hopefully people get that, and they don't just get, like, grumpy and be like, oh, I don't want to go there. They're snobs. They won't do what I ask for. But it's all part of just professionalism. If you were going to go to a restaurant and they were like, well, there's a 50-50 chance that you're going to get food poisoning and you're going to spend the day on the toilet tomorrow, like, I wouldn't get the food. I wouldn't be like, you know what, I really want it. It looks great. I'd be like, you know what, I trust your opinion. Thank you.
I will have the diarrhea swordfish, please.
Yeah. I will get something else. And people just don't look at it the same way when we're telling them no for, like, what they want for body art, which is much more permanent.
Yeah, and I've had similar issues too, where, like, local surgeons will do that, and they give these people this false hope of, like, oh, now you can always get that belly button piercing. Or I've had surgeons in the area that do earlobe closures, and you're like, oh yeah, you can totally get this re-pierced in 6 weeks, which is not the case. That's a year minimum. Mm-hmm. And then I have that argument with people. I had one lady come in who the surgeon actually recommended to me, to pierce it. And I was like, yeah, a year. He's like, well, he's a doctor and he said 6 weeks. I'm like, well, all right, well, I'm a piercer. And I said a year, and I'm not discounting what the doctor says. Yeah. However, I know how these things heal where he doesn't do this. It got to the point where he actually bought a piercing gun because I kept turning down his clients. He bought a piercing gun and was doing it for people. And this one lady, again, going back to the, that losing battle with clients with unrealistic expectations, I told her no. She got bent out of shape, went to the surgeon. Surgeon pierced it with a gun, and literally 3 weeks later, they were throbbing. He did it right through the scar, and she came, with lack of a better analogy, tail between her legs, and came up to me. She's like, "Yeah, you were right. Why would he lie to me like that?" And I was like, "Well, you paid him thousands of dollars for this. I mean, he'd tell you whatever the hell he wanted to, just as long as he got money." As shitty as that is, and that was her turnaround point.
I don't think it's necessarily lying because I've had similar situations with piercing earlobes after they've been repaired by a surgeon, and it's the same thing. It's like, oh yeah, you can get it done in a month or 2 months or whatever. And I don't think it's so much lying. I just think that doctors just don't care about the success of a body piercing. I don't think they see it as an improvement on the body.
That's true.
I think they just see it as like, oh yeah, piercings can heal, so obviously all piercings will heal. So, just do whatever you want. Like, they don't think of it in those terms. Like, there's nothing probably in medical school where they're like, though, this is how a body piercing heals. But if you can actually break it down to a doctor and be like, look, a body piercing is a fistula. Would you want a fistula forming in this healing scar tissue? Blah, blah, blah. And sometimes they've been like, oh, that makes total sense. Like when I equate it like that, because it has gone through that cycle of like getting back to the doctor, and then the doctor will email me and be like, it's totally fine, I'll send a note. And it's like, well, I appreciate you signing a note, but I'm still not going to do it.
Yeah. Well, I've had an argument with a local surgeon. It was like, yeah, and it's like, yeah, the connective tissues there, the circulation's absolutely not the same. Scars take quite some time for that.
Yeah. Well, whatever. I guess we should just go to medical school and we can just, start
wreak havoc.
You want some breast implants? I'll do some breast implants on you. Can't be that hard.
Just one in the center, like the lady from Total Recall, or Kung Fury.
Yeah. All right. I feel like we're getting off track here.
Yes. I mean, in the end, in conclusion, I'm about offering a good service, and a service that's going to last, and that's not just with the jewelry we sell, but also with the actual piercing service provided. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people may take that negatively. Sometimes people are appreciative of it. But sometimes with those losing battles that you may have in your studio, I feel that sadly, not until someone gets burned from, with that, well, screw it, I'll find someone that does it, and they do it, and it blows up in their face, or backfires. And sometimes you can actually gain a client from those situations where it's like, yeah, you said no, and I was a jerk about it, and you were right, so I'm sorry, I'll listen.
Or you can always have, like, sometimes in situations like that, I do have like the smug satisfaction of like when people are like, yeah, I should have listened, and I went here and I just got it anyway, and it healed horribly. And I'll never say it to them to their face, but in the back of my mind I'm thinking like, yeah, you get what you deserve, kind of thing. And like, I hate to see people have those situations, but sometimes it's literally the only way that they will learn and believe it for next time. So human evolution keeps on moving along.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thanks for talking to me, Brian, and come back another time, and we'll come up with some more topics.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. Yeah, I look forward to it.
See you. Okay, everybody, so that's going to wrap it up for this week. Thanks, Brian, for coming on the show and chit-chatting with me for a little while. This weekend, I'm going to be heading to New York City to see a wrestling show, and I'm going to have a few friends in the car with me on the way, so maybe we'll record something for you for next week or for an episode coming up soon. One of the people in the car with me is going to be one of my tattooers, so we can kind of talk about shop life and maybe Rick and Morty or something. Who knows? But stick around, and we'll have some more episodes for you coming up soon. All right? Thanks for listening. For more information about the show, visit piercingwizardpodcast.com or like Piercing Wizard Podcast on Facebook. For more info about your host, visit precisionbodyarts.com or search Ryan PBA on Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. If you enjoy the show, you can subscribe on iTunes, Apple Podcast, and Google Play. Music by Benny B. Blanco. Show copyright 2017, Precision Body Arts LLC, all rights reserved.
About you. One of the
Whoa. This is trippy. Remake! Okay, that's terrible. Yeah, it's me.